This is Fun with Swales. I'm Chris. We're going to kind of talk about the last 7 years of not so much the actual studies, but more the study design and kind of the things we've learned on how to study swales. So WSDOT was tasked to study bioswales about 7 or so years ago, and we came up with a design, we built it, and we started getting data, and we started learning kind of how the swale operated, how the design was going to operate with our study. And after many lessons learned, this exact same study, which started off looking like this, now looks like this. Same study, but this is ultimately what we ended up having to build to capture the data we needed. So over the next few minutes here, we'll talk about how we got from this to this and the fun and painful lessons we learned. So I'll start off, most of you are probably familiar with this. This is Washington State. The 6 dots there are the swales that we have either current studies on or have had studies on. We're going to focus on this one. This is called Mottman. It's right at our office. So it made it easy to do lots and lots of spot checking, and we could really keep an eye on it.
So I'll take over. Why do we monitor? Well, because we love stormwater and we love tracking hydrology and creating spreadsheets and all that fun stuff, but also because we have to. WSDOT's permit requires that we have a monitoring program to evaluate BMPs. We want to produce, scientifically credible and representative data, and they want to use that in the highway runoff manual if possible. So, and we go by the TAPE program guidelines. So these are just our general, the storms that we would target. We need 0.15 inches of rain, 10 alloquats minimum sample per composite jar. We like to get a dry period of 6 hours or more if we can, and we need to capture 75% of the storm's hydrograph.
Back to me. So what does a bioswale mean to WSDOT? So we go with the highway runoff manual definition. So you're going to have a longitudinal slope of 1.5 to 5, nice gentle slope, max water depth of 2 to 4 inches, and a bed width of 2 feet to 10 feet. Minimum length of 100 feet. There you have a WSDOT bioswale. To measure our hydraulic information, we use it was called FTS. They've now, between multiple corporate mergers and takeovers of companies, I have no idea what the current company is called, but we use a program called AutoCaller Plus, and allows us to have telemetry data and download data, so we can actively watch the site as it's sampling. So we can watch the hydrology numbers, and then we get a data download as well to get really dense data set when reviewing it. And the best part about it is we can graph any 2 parameters on the graph at the same time. So in this case, we have rainfall and runoff. So the blue line is the rainfall, the 2 pink lines are the runoff, or pink and red is the runoff. So we can kind of look for trends to make sure that the rainfall matches the runoff to show that our monitoring equipment is functioning properly.
So I'll go over some of the equipment we use on site. This is not a swale. This is an embankment study that we did previously. So here's our data collection platform, the green box there. We have a solar panel with a GPS, and we have rain gauge. We have one, but we also have a second as like a quality control. We have the GOES antenna, which allows us to get hourly readings on any parameters we want from the site during storm events, check batteries and off times, stuff like that. The Ubicom, we actually use that. We can do the same thing. We can get instant results back if we're looking at something that isn't in that hour time frame. If I want storm event information that isn't, I don't want to wait, I'm impatient. Or we can actually send information to it. So we can set them up remotely to sample. We can send sampling thresholds and other information to the site that way. It makes it especially nice during these years of working from home, because it's much easier to just kind of turn things on if we know the site's ready to go. So if I know someone's been out there. This is the inside of the box we use, as Chris said, it was FTS. It's their Axiom H2 data logger. You got the battery, go back a second. You got the battery in there, a bunch of all kinds of different connections to some equipment that we actually don't even use anymore. So as we were saying, this is the original swale design. And so it had 5 sample locations up through from the influent all throughout the swale. At each of those locations in front of the flumes that were there were spreader sumps. And then there you have the 5 flumes. And then for the stage measurement at each location, there were 2 pressure transducers, so 10 total. And then each station also had an ISCO automated sampler. So as you can see, that's a lot of stuff going on there. And for sampling purposes, that could cause problems where any of these things might go wrong at one time, and then it's kind of ruins your event. Maybe you'll get the first and third sample location, but there was something wrong with the PTs reading incorrectly at the second. So we kind of had to figure out a better way to do things. So, but this is a beautiful site of the picture of the original site. As you can see, this is looking down from the influent there. You can see all the little spreader sumps down through the end there. And this is what it looked like, I think, as Chris said, after the first event.
So yeah, we got it all set up and we're like, great. And then the first event comes up and we come and look at the swale and we're like, that doesn't look like a swale anymore. So our first thing we learned is that our flumes are way too small. The picture on this one, you can see we have a little bit of a bypass to get the excess water from around the flume because there's too much water coming in. So that's water we're not accounting for hydraulically. And on the other picture, you can see that line, we're at the top of the flume. So in that moment, we were capturing all the water, but any more water comes at any more intensity, we're overflowing the flume. That's what that looks like. You can see the blue line is the influent flumes. That's the one we're kind of concentrating on. It jumps up and down a lot as intensity changes. And then once it hits that top of that flume, which is about 0.8 feet, it just flatlines. Now it shouldn't do that. It stays at the same level for about, it's like 6 hours on that graph or 5 hours. So we knew something was wrong. And what we came down to was the flume was too small. So we did some math with our catchment area and rain intensity and using some of the data from the smaller storms. And we said, all right, 1 foot H flumes, that's bigger. All right, flume is kind of too small. So we got this built in and we're like, look at that. We're measuring everything, it's perfect. We got all the water captured, this is great. And someone goes, hey, what was that thing about how the maximum depth of water in a swale? And, oh, 4 inches. Well, that flume is 1 foot deep. So if you're measuring 1 foot water, if you're backing up the water, so it's a foot deep and it's only supposed to be 4 inches, are you still measuring a swale? We thought, no, probably not anymore. So again, back to the math. This time we at least had accurate hydraulic data to be able to determine the flume size. So then we settled up on this, a 3 foot H flume. This flume allows us to measure the maximum discharge at the effluent, and the water never gets to 4 inches. Hasn't gotten to 4 inches yet, but we can see if it does too, because we can measure higher.
So then, as Chris was talking about, this is actually the current swale design. If you can remember the first one, a lot was going on. So here we have just the 2 sample locations, the influent and effluent. We got rid of everything in the middle. We have 1 spreader sump just after the influent flume, a flume at each location for 2 pressure transducers, which I'll get to that in a minute. There used to be 2 at each location, but there's only 1 at each now. And ISCO automated sampler, so just 2 sample locations, and it's a lot less going on, and we've had much greater success sampling, which we'll talk about later. As far as I was talking about the PTs, on the left-hand side here, it's our old setup. As you can see off to the side of the flume there is a PT stilling well. We had 2 PTs in there, and it would connect to the flume, and as water came through, it would read the stage for us. But just probably in the last 2 to 3 years, we've switched over to just radar measurement, and it's worked out really good for us. We tested it for a year at a different site and went ahead and went with it. And I mean, we've had pretty great results with it. Here's some of the pros and cons of each. The PTs, the sediment could easily clog up in some of the holes in the flumes we used, and then they wouldn't read accurately. Kind of required more maintenance to clean out the stilling well. I feel like we're always taking them out, vacuuming them out. A lot of sediment would get in. They needed to be re-zeroed kind of frequently, and in the winter they'd freeze up sometimes. Even though we put those stilling wells in the ground, it could still kind of freeze, thaw, could kind of mess with them a little bit. The radar can actually just read the sediment in the flume. It requires less maintenance. The readings, once you clean the sediment out, it's pretty much just goes back to 0. I mean, we zero them, but I don't even think it's necessary. And the data can be corrected easier. So for instance, there'll be times I'll communicate with Chris that, hey, this flume's reading such and such amount of sediment in the flume. And if it's not a lot, and we know that the water volume will probably exceed that, he can actually go and do a little bit of correction if we can't get a field member out there, a storm's coming and we really want to go for it. So now we'll turn into like, we took care of the construction issues, all the stuff that was in the flume, and we really simplified it, and it worked out great. But then we had to get into the sampling. We wanted to be successful for tape also. And so just for background, prior to the swales, we had only done really roadside embankment studies. Not a lot of flow. When it does come down the embankment, it's slow trickling in. So, our most concern was getting enough volume. And so in the swales, it was actually completely opposite, which we learned, it's coming through fast, you're getting plenty of volume to sample. So I'll start with, what's a sampling threshold? Well, the sampling threshold is a number with volume in liters that we plug in that's going to pass each sample point, and that triggers, the logger will trigger that ISCO to say, hey, if you said the threshold was 1,000 liters, after I read 1,000 liters, I'll pull that first aliquot for your composite. So for instance, our jars hold 37 aliquots, and I did some more complex. I should have done like 37,000 liters in the threshold of 1,000, but so in the past, we always wanted the full jar, but we learned something when we started to sample these swales. Wait, no, I didn't skip one, but here's what I would do. When I said we like spreadsheets and graphing, we would look at the volume, different rain events, and we would create a relationship, and oh, this great formula right here. I can use this, and I can pretty much figure out a threshold, give or take, that's going to work out for the sampling event. It worked great on the roadside embankments, like I said, because the cadence slow, worked out. And then I did it for all the other site locations throughout the swale. And so this is what we want it to look like. This is the volume is the pink line, and the sample numbers are the steps in the blue line. So we want it to be kind of evenly spread out, and it looks great. That's what we would hope for. But what we found out is that you put in a threshold into this for these swales, what would happen is the storm would start off slow, volume would come in, our threshold would hold up really well. We get the 1 and 2 sample there, nicely stepped up. Well, a ton of volume would come through, and the logger would say, wait a minute, your threshold was 1,000, I just got 10,000 liters. That's 10 samples. It would send those commands to the ISCO, and the ISCO can't keep up. It can't sample that fast. So we refer to it as sample command stacking. The ISCO would stack those commands in its memory and then just start pulling every 5-minute cycle that it had. And so that threw off our coverage of the event. We no longer were really getting that 75% of the hydrograph anymore. We were missing volumes. And so it wasn't working out. As you can see, it started to go climb up. We got a bunch of stacking, and then it slowed down at the end, and it kind of resumed its normal sampling that we would like to see. So how did we fix this? Well, as usual, it's all just looking at the data. What we did is if you really looked at the data in 5-minute intervals, I could see what the maximum amount of volume that would flow by each sample point, like for a certain event. So I knew that if the maximum amount of volume in any 5-minute interval was like the 3,800 that's there, then if my threshold's far lower than that, I'm going to get that problem again. So it was all just looking at the data, and I'll let Chris talk about how well it's worked out for us.
Yeah, it's worked out nicely. So from 2017 to 2020 with the old setup, all that equipment that anytime, it's like a bridge that has multiple failure points. Anytime one of those things failed, we had to reject it. We had 22 attempts with 4 successful events. And then in 2020, things slowed down and we weren't able to go out in the field for a while, but we started back up in 2022. And in only 6 months of sampling, we've had a little bit more since this presentation was created. We had 7 attempts, 5 successful events. So we went from an 18% success rate sampling events to a 71% success rate. So just the summary of what we learned is you don't need a big enough flume to capture your flow, but you got to need a big enough flume to capture your flow so that you don't alter the hydrology of your BMP, because at that point you're not monitoring your BMP anymore. You're monitoring something that you created out of your own and not an actual HRM BMP. And then try to remove as many failure points as possible. We don't need 2 pressure transducers. We can use 1 radar. We don't need 5 flumes. We can use 2 flumes. And then just getting as much good hydraulic data for each site and each location. And then just keep it simple. We were just super ambitious with these designs and these ideas. And it came down to, you just can't get that. You got to really go for what is the simplest plan you can do, and then get that, and then step up your ambition as you go.
as Chris said, we still kind of when we get together in a room, we still tend to like want to throw out these great, really exciting ideas, and we kind of have to rein ourselves in because of the things we've learned that it may not work for monitoring. It sounds great, and we want to treat all these great things, but for monitoring, the more complex it is, the harder the results are to get. So that's it.
Yeah, and so now that also one more, now that we've kind of really figured out how to sample these things and how to study them, we can really move forward in applying these to cool new studies. So currently we have a short swale study, so a swale that's built smaller than the HRM specifications, trying to see if we still get the treatment levels of a full-size swale. We have a sediment basin swale that we're studying right now in Spokane, where the area got tons of sediment, washes out the swale, silts it over. And so we put in a large siltation basin in front of it to see if that would fix it. And then a swale longevity study that we have wrapping up right now too, where we take swales that are beyond their maximum life expectancy in the HRM, which is 20 years. And we're trying to see, are they still functioning to their current or their original design parameters? And so we're gonna be wrapping those up pretty soon. And then kind of after that, the possibilities are limitless. But we've swale, salt tolerant swales, all sorts of different medians, different mixes, different pollutant removals. So all sorts of possibilities. But that's it. Thank you.